The topic of this podcast is reinforcement schedules and their application in teaching and learning. This podcast will firstly define the term reinforcement. It will then be expanded on by explaining the two types of reinforcement, both positive and negative. This will then lead into the reinforcement schedules. The podcast will discuss the 5 reinforcement schedules, and it will also define each term. We will then provide an example of its applications in teaching and learning, explain the response pattern, and state the reaction when the reinforcement stops. Following on from this, the podcast will conclude with a brief evaluation of the effectiveness of the use of reinforcement schedules in teaching and learning. Before we speak about reinforcement schedules, it is important to briefly mention punishment, which can be used as a method instead of reinforcement. According to Snowman 2003, punishment weakens or eliminates a behaviour. According to Woolfolk 2016, punishment involves decreasing or suppressing behaviour. A behaviour followed by a punisher is less likely to be repeated in similar situations in the future. An example in a school setting is giving students detention.
There are 2 types of reinforcement, positive and negative reinforcement. According to Snowman, positive reinforcement is to strengthen a target behaviour by presenting a positive reinforcer after the behaviour occurs. For example, the teacher gives a reward to a student after a correct behaviour occurs. Snowman also suggests that negative reinforcement is strengthening a behaviour by removing an aversive stimulus after the behaviour occurs. An example in a school setting for this would be the removal of homework. Continuous reinforcement. Continuous reinforcement is a behaviour which is followed by a consequence every time it occurs. For example, receiving a chocolate bar every time you complete a maths problem. Continuous reinforcement is among the best techniques to help a student pick up any new behaviour. According to Woolfolk, the student is acquiring the behaviour rapidly because he or she is being rewarded for every behavioural occurrence. Consequence, however, shows if the teacher stops giving the chocolate bar, the student stops doing the maths problem. Fixed interval. According to Woolfolk, fixed interval is reinforcement after a set period of time. For example, students studying as a weekly quiz approaches. The response rate increases as time for reinforcement approaches, then drops after reinforcement. Students will study for a pop quiz as it approaches, but immediately stop studying once it is completed. Variable interval. Variable interval is a type of operant conditioning reinforcement schedule. A variable interval is when a reward occurs after an unpredictable amount of time. According to Hollie, when behaviours are reinforced with a variable interval reinforcement schedule, reinforcement is available only after an unknown period of time. For example, Woolfolk refers to an example in a classroom that is like giving pop quizzes to a class on random days. For instance, a class could have a pop quiz 2 times a week and might not have another for another 2 weeks. Another example is when a car salesman gets a bonus for an unpredictable amount of cars sold. According to Woolfolk, a variable interval is reinforcement after varying length of time. She also suggests that the response pattern for this is a slow and steady rate of response.
Fixed means that a behaviour is being reinforced on a consistent schedule. Schedule refers to how often the reinforcement is being provided. Reinforcement can be seen as a student receiving a reward for doing something. If a certain behaviour is exhibited, then a reinforcer is presented. The concept of reinforcement says that the reinforcer should provide motivation for the behaviour to be repeated. Fixed schedule means that the reinforcement is made available every time a specific behaviour takes place. The schedule must remain constant. It can be presented every second time, every 10th time, and so on. If it is not constant, then it cannot be deemed as a fixed ratio, but must be considered as a different type of schedule reinforcement. An example of fixed ratio in the classroom is if a student reads a predetermined number of books, the result would be that the learner would receive no homework. According to Woolfolk, the use of fixed ratio results in a rapid response rate. However, when reinforcement stops, there is a rapid drop in response rate when expected numbers of responses are given and no reinforcer appears. Variable ratio, a reinforcement schedule in which reinforcement is given after an unpredictable number of responses. The frequency with which the behaviour is reinforced can help determine how quickly a response is learned and also how strong the learned response may be. This is the most powerful type of intermittent reinforcement schedule. An example of this: a student might receive a reward of a gold star after 5 responses in the classroom. The next time, a different student might get awarded a gold star after 2 responses. Each time, the teacher controls the number of responses in order for the student to obtain a reward. The student might receive a gold star after a varied number of responses, such as after 3 responses or 7 responses. This means that the reinforcement schedule will be totally unpredictable, and therefore the students will not know when they are going to receive a reward. The response pattern for this variable ratio is unpredictable and yields high and steady response rates. The students are not fixated on the reward, as it is unexpected as to when they will receive it. It encourages the students to be actively participating and constantly learning, as it is unknown when they will receive a reward. Extinction. According to Woolfolk 2013, extinction is the disappearance of a learned response. An example of extinction from Snowman 2003 is a teacher ignoring a student who spontaneously answers a question without waiting to be called on. Extinction is when a behaviour stops because the stimulus has been taken away. This is relevant for all the reinforcement schedules discussed today. Finally, to conclude our podcast, the concept behind using both positive and negative reinforcement in the education system is to increase desired behaviours in the classroom. Before implementing reinforcers, the teacher should at first get to know his or her students to effectively implement the various reinforcements. When students display the desired behaviour, they should be rewarded accordingly, using one of the specified reinforcements. Once the learner has demonstrated the correct behaviour, the reinforcer should follow as soon as possible for it to be successful. Like all reinforcement systems, if a behaviour is reinforced too frequently, the subject may become satiated with the reinforcer and the reinforcer would lose its effectiveness. Randomization of this reward may help limit the satiation, according to Parry and Cruz 2011, cited in Hollie 2016. The need for the implementation of the various types of reinforcements can be between students within the classroom setting and can be customized to cater for each individual students. Richards 2014.
Thank you for listening to our podcast.